Hello class, hopefully you're doing well today. We are going to review chapter 5, Policing, History and Structure, and the next PowerPoint we're going to review is going to be chapter 6. So it kind of goes along with this chapter, but right now we're going to do chapter 5. Basically it begins about policing, the history, structure, where we are at, how we arrive where we're at today, and a lot of history. So very good chapter, a lot of good information, and we'll review a lot of the information, but ensure you read the chapter because there's a lot more in there than what we can go over today. All right, so to begin with, the American police system got its roots from England. So in England, back in the early days, the medieval days, there was what was called a shire. And a shire was a small town or a village. And it was made up of about 15 to 25 families. So it was a very small village. The overseer of the shire, either the mayor or a person that was in charge, was also in charge of security. And that person was known as a reeve. So if you put those two terms together, you get shire reeve, which equals sheriff. So that's how the term sheriff came to be that we still use today in modern America. So the sheriff is the overseer basically of a town or a city or a county. So that's how shire reeve came into being. During this time, there were night watchmen. And what they did was obviously they would watch the town or village at night because they were fearful of intruders or arson or somebody that was not from the village or the town that would come in. So the night watchmen, what they would do at a certain time, they would do what's called cover fire. And it comes from a French term called CrJ, which means cover fire. And literally, they would put out the torches that were lit at night to light the village or the town at a certain time. So once the cover fire term was given, the fires would go out and the town would go to sleep, and the night watchman would watch for any intruders. This term, cover fire, now means curfew. And a curfew means at a certain time people need to be in their houses out off the street. So again, another term that is still used today that came from some medieval days with policing, and it's a French term, and it means curfew. The other thing that's the book doesn't talk about, but basically called the hue and cry. And that's what the night watchman would do. They would hew or make a noise or cry out that there was an intruder, there was a fire, there was something wrong. So a lot of these English roots from England has come over to the United States. And we credit England for most of our policing that we have today. And we'll talk about the growth of modern policing that began in England next. So the Bow Street Runners were the original policemen in England. And again, the book does a good job of talking about the Bow Street Runners. And again, the 1700s is when they started, which is a long time ago. And basically they protected the streets, the citizens, and the towns from outside influences or people that did not belong there. So the Bow Street Runners began the first police force in England in the early 1700s. Next, we move to the London Metropolitan Police Services. That was founded by Sir Robert Peel in 1829. Long time ago, but not that long ago. And this was the first modern police force. And the principles that Sir Robert Peel wanted to have was that it was possible for a police unit to discourage crime. And also, he wanted to practice preventive patrol. So his goals were that if you have preventive patrol, meaning somebody going out into the street in a uniform, it would discourage crime. So that was the first time that was done. And that's basically what we do today in modern police departments. So a little bit more about Metropolitan Police Force. First time that they were uniformed, back in 1829. And again, they had to inspire the highest personal ideal. So they were looked at as somebody of a higher stature because they had to enforce the law, so they had to obey the law. In 1829, Robert Peel adopted a military administrative style, very much like the military. Everybody has a boss, everybody has a subordinate. There's sergeants, there's lieutenants, there's captains. So it was very much like the military. But the new police force was not immediately well received because it was new. But it eventually continued into a world-renowned police force. And there's a lot of other things that that Robert Peel did. Go back here for a second. One of them was he wanted the officers to go through an academy or training, which they did, which we do now. And he wanted the officers to carry weapons, which they did, and we do now. So a lot of things that he established back in 1829 we still do today. So most of our roots come from Sir Robert Peel. So basically now we're in the United States, and obviously it was a lawless society when we first got here, when immigration began. The frontier was full of gangsters, thugs, and bugalugs, and vigilantism was on the rampant. So the police forces tried in the beginning to become like the Robert Peel's police force, but it took a little bit of time. In the early cities, there was a lot of police forces that were based on the new police system. And during this period, the book talks about the terms of reform, International Association of Police Chiefs, Fraternal Order of Police, police women. All these things began in the early 20th century. One of the things that impacted police most was technology. So just think how technology wasn't there back in the 1800s. There was very few vehicles, there was very few radios, there was no telephones. So nowadays, though, the impact of technology is huge. So that is probably one of the most, the biggest things that ever influenced police was technology. Telephones, automobiles, radios, lights, sirens, fingerprinting. So all those things have influenced how police operate. Prohibition led to large amounts of crime and corruption. That's when police were paid off to support bootlegging operations or the making of illegal alcohol. And the Wickersham Commission, you'll hear about that a few times, they recognized the unenforceability of prohibition in 1931. So again, prohibition didn't work. That was the banning of alcohol. And again, it was unworkable and unenforceable. So police really couldn't do anything about it. The last half of the 20th century, 1960s and 1970s, changed the police environment due to cultural changes. But a President's Commission report found the police were isolated from the communities. They were not involved within the daily conframes of policing within the community. And they set new standards and goals, which we'll talk about in a little bit. One of the things that has changed is called evidence-based policing, and it's scientific police management. And it's basically the application of social science to police administration. The biggest days of this was in the 1970s. And what they did was they had research and evaluation of crime patterns and persons that commit crimes, and that's where they concentrated their efforts in the cities and counties. So the National Institute of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Statistics those are two of the biggest research evaluation entities that look at scientific police management. It's where stats are gathered. Like we talked about stats in a previous chapter about crimes, the index crimes. Those come from. The Kansas City experiment, the book talks about, very interesting, basically found no difference in crime or in citizens' fear of crime based on amount of patrol activity. What they did was they saturated a certain area in Kansas City with police cars and police officers. And they wanted to see if the visualization of police would do anything to stop or lessen crime. And it did not. So read about the Kansas City experiment in the chapter. Very interesting experiment. Not sure what that would be like today. Probably have the same results. This, though, because it didn't work, led to new strategies of patrol, which we're going to talk about. Directed patrol, split force patrol, and it prioritized calls for service. So again, the dispatchers would prioritize these calls. And again, it depending on the severity of the incident, and that would dictate which call went first. That's one of the things that came out of the Kansas City experiment, which was a long time ago. So evidence-based policing today, it is the single most powerful force for change in policing today. So again, it's constantly evaluating and rewriting guidelines as far as agencies go, as far as units go, and the training of officers. Evidence-based, you'll hear that a lot. American policing today, there's federal, there's state, and there's local agencies that have judicial jurisdictions. Also, there's private security. So we'll talk about some of these agencies and what they do and what they don't do. So as far as federal agencies, there's a whole bunch of federal agencies, which we'll go over in a second. But federal officers, law enforcement officers, they can conduct criminal investigations, execute search warrants, make arrests, carry firearms. Basically, that's what state officers do and county officers do. So again, federal, state, and county. And if you're a peace officer or a law enforcement officer, you're authorized to do all these things right here, depending on who you work for, federal, state, local. This is some of the federal law enforcement agencies. Bet you didn't know there's that many. And some of you may actually end up working for one or more of these agencies. So check these out. And they're very good jobs to have, very good retirement, good security, promotional opportunities. And again, there's a lot of opportunity once you get in the federal government. Sometimes it takes a long time, may be difficult, but keep on keeping on if you want one of these jobs, especially with the FBI or an investigator with one of these other agencies over here. So these are federal, that means they're going to be in different states, okay? And this is in your book. FBI is created in 1908, and the mission was to protect the United States against terrorists and foreign intelligence threats, etc. And it has field offices in every U.S. state and around the world, and it's a very popular job. It can be difficult to get into. Having a bachelor's degree in criminal justice is definitely, if that's on your resume, that's definitely a plus when you do apply. I suggest if you want to go in the FBI, you try to do an internship at some point with a local FBI office or another office just to see if you like that type of work. It is changing. And again, I know a couple FBI agents personally, and they love their job when it's retired and would do it all over again. So again, it's a very fulfilling career with the FBI. They do a lot of other things besides enforcing various laws. They do intelligence, and they do research, and they have a lot of laboratories that they do DNA testing on, and there's the counterterrorism division also, and that can be worldwide. So again, the FBI, good place to go. Sometimes hard to get in, but you could do it if you really want it. State agencies, they're centralized and they're decentralized depending on what they do. We'll go over what those are. Basically, CHP, California Highway Patrol, is a state agency in California. And they used to have state police, but they don't have them anymore. But basically, every state has some sort of patrol of the state highways. So here's some of the agencies as far as the state goes. We have all kinds of these. We have alcohol beverage control in California. We have Fish and Wildlife in California. We have Bureau of Investigation. So we have all these, plus more in California. So again, state job is great to have. You don't have to move state to state. If you get one of those jobs, you just move within the state. If you want to promote, money's good, retirement's good, and again, exciting career. Local agencies can be cities or counties. They talk about municipal, that means cities or counties. Sheriff's Department runs the counties, and depending on where you're at, you could be working for a community college police department. You could be working for a city police department. Depends on where you're at. The city usually appoints a police chief. The sheriff is elected, and the sheriffs have responsibilities of the counties, and they also operate county jails. So the sheriffs operate the jails. City police just do policing within the city limits. Private security. Some of you will go into private security. It's growing right now. Not as much pay, not as much training, not as good retirement, but it's a stepping stone for many to get into law enforcement. Here are some private security agencies that you may have seen. Again, this is in your book. Integrating public service and private security. And again, most work together. In California, you can get what's called a guard card, and that authorizes you to carry a weapon. You don't have as many protections if you discharge that weapon at somebody if you're a private security guard, where if you are a police officer or a sheriff, you have much more protection because of your status as a peace officer in California. Okay, that concludes this chapter. Again, make sure you read that. If you have questions, go ahead and put that in the discussion board or let me know. And again, it's a good chapter. We're not too concerned about statistics, but just the basic terminology that some of which we've gone over today. Okay, have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.